gonna talk for a bit about Final Fantasy. Now, I wasn't sure if I wanted to do this since I don't consider myself a big expert when it comes to Final Fantasy, but I feel like I'll just say whatever I want on this. So, basically, I'll just start from here. Final Fantasy is a big franchise within the JRPG community. It pretty much popularized the genre, or at least helped it alongside Dragon Quest. And it's been around, I think, since the late '80s or whatever. It's it has 16 games in the mainline stuff. That's just the main games too, because side stuff is even more. But 16 games is a lot. And what's funny is that these games aren't even connected. Um, they're all like each Final Fantasy is its own separate story. Actually, some of these games even have sequels, so I guess it's more than 16 games in the main line. But like the original Final Fantasy, you just pick the role. You pick the fighter, a warrior, white mage, black mage, stuff like that. It wasn't until a little later on that they started adding characters, or at least characters that were distinguishable enough or had personality. I think one of the first popular characters they created was Terra Brantford in Final Fantasy VI. And there was another, then my, my mistake, I skipped over. But Terra in Final Fantasy VI, I'm not going to talk too much about it, I don't think I play that one, but she seemed to be one of the early examples of a major Final Fantasy character. Final Fantasy VII, that's the big one. That is the most popular among the Final Fantasy games. I would say it's Final Fantasy VII is to the Final Fantasy games like what Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time is to its own franchise. That's just my way of seeing it. But seven, here's a funny thing. Prior to this, Final Fantasy games had been mostly on Nintendo systems. The NES and the Super Nintendo had Final Fantasy 1 through 6. Come Final Fantasy 7, that was only on PlayStation. And that was considered a big deal at the time. I believe it was going to be on the N64, but because Final Fantasy 7 was a huge game, considering it came out in the late 90s, so the consoles weren't strong enough to handle such a big game. I believe Square Enix didn't believe that. I'm sorry, not Square Enix, SquareSoft, because at the time it was still SquareSoft. But I believe they did not believe that the Final Fantasy could run well on a Nintendo 64 cartridge because Nintendo has not gone to the CDs yet. PlayStation had. Even Sega Saturn used CDs, but because of that, PlayStation the Final Fantasy was only on PlayStation. And I think PlayStation helped fund it too, so exclusivity rights for a bit. Final Fantasy VII is about a guy named Cloud who starts off being this. He starts off destroying factories and stuff because his company's polluting the earth. He's doing it as a favor to a friend, and he's getting paid. But over time, he starts doing a bit more. Like it goes from stopping some evil corporation to saving the world. So his main friends will include Tifa Lockhart, a childhood friend, Barrett Wallace, the guy who was leader of this rebel group, and a big one, Aerith Gainsborough. Back in the day, Aerith's name was incorrectly spelled as Ares, but nowadays they corrected it to Aerith. At the time, you actually Final Fantasy VII didn't have voice acting, and you could pick the names of the main characters, so I guess it didn't matter that her name was misspelled. You could just fix it. That's what I did when I played the game. But moving beyond that, Final Fantasy VII was considered to have a great story. It had a great cast of characters, even had the most iconic villain, that being Sephiroth. He is one of the most iconic villains in video games. I'd say I would compare him to even Bowser in Super Mario Brothers or Dr. Eggman from Sonic. So Sephiroth, he's one of the big guys, and his rivalry with Cloud is very iconic among games as well. So One funny thing I noticed about Final Fantasy VII, this is just me rambling a bit. Cloud has essentially two main love interests. He has Tifa, who was part of this freedom fighter type group trying to liberate the planet from evil corporations and pollution. Then Cloud has another love interest who's a girl who's all about nature and tries to help him see the more adventurous side to life. She's delicate, but she's strong too. That kind of mirrors Sonic the Hedgehog, who had a relationship with Sally Acorn, a girl who was also part of a freedom fighter group who destroys factories, and Amy Rose, a girl who is very delicate but still strong. I don't even. It's probably not intentional, but I know the whole girl going for guy is a bit of a subversion in Japan. So Aerith and Amy fit that subversion. And just to throw it out there, Mai Shinairu does that in Fatal Fury with Andy Bogard. So yeah, just something funny I found out. But moving right along, the later games came along. Final Fantasy VIII, I believe, wasn't that popular. I believe it's due to something called the GF system, in which you had to assign like this mystical creature to your character that affects the character's abilities, and it was kind of a pain to figure out. I don't think it was that bad, and the story is pretty interesting. Final Fantasy VIII is a little underrated, but Squall Leonhard is a good character. He has a good cast of friends, and similar to Cloud, he meets this girl who kind of helps him come out of his shell. Squall, like Cloud, is a bit introverted, so they needed this girl to kind of lighten up their lives, and it's like I guess you could call it a good romance story. I'm not that big into romance really. I respect a good pairing, and I do believe that some pairings need to. And I will say that I won't like a story as much if I don't think that a pairing's good, but I am not super into romance. But I do appreciate it when it's done right. I think the only other popular Final Fantasy game was Final Fantasy X. The main character was, I think, Titus or Titus. I don't know how his name was supposed to be pronounced, but he's the main character there. He was like this underwater soccer player, and then I'm still kind of figuring out Final Fantasy X, but it was popular enough that it got its own sequel, Final Fantasy X 2. But that one had the character Yuna as the main character. And then another major Final Fantasy game was Final Fantasy 13. From what I played, I could see why it wasn't too popular. The battle system is a little weird. I mean, this was one of the last Final Fantasy games used a turn based because Final Fantasy, for the most part, had a turn based battle system, and this game still had the turn based. You character waits a turn before attacking, but the actual fighting's a little weird. It's so the level. I don't think it doesn't seem to have a proper level up system. It's just, and the story is a little, it was a little all over the place. I mean, I just need to get more used to it, but it's still a story that's all over. It does start off a little all over the place. It was like some pacing issues, at least for me. The game wasn't too bad, but I could see why it got so heavily criticized. Then Final Fantasy 15 was one of the first games to ditch the turn-based thing and just goes straight into an action RPG. That game honestly wasn't bad. I liked playing as Noctis and his crew. Story was a little hard to follow at first, but still pretty interesting. Had great. The combat I feel like was great. And then yeah, I know it gets penal. Yeah, again, it gets criticized because it's not a typical Final Fantasy game. So, but sometimes games need to evolve a bit. Because I know this happened when Final Fantasy 16 came out. Final Fantasy 16 was was a big one. It was probably the more mature of the Final Fantasy games. Main character Clive, he's dealing with a lot. I don't want to get too big into it, but I guess everyone knows that he lost his family and he's trying to rebuild his kingdom. But it was a good game. It's a good game to play. I wasn't sure if I wanted to get it at first. I decided to give it a chance, and I ended up liking it. Is it turn based? No, but it doesn't need to be. So I don't see why that's really a big deal. Video games change with time. God of War didn't play the same, but I know God of War got some criticism in 2018 when it ditched the old PlayStation 2 type of gameplay. Mario, he went from 2D to 3D. Sonic, 2D to 3D. Resident Evil went from fixed cam angles over the shoulder. Games evolve, for better or worse. Doesn't change the fact that Final Fantasy 16 was a good game. Um, I've seen it get compared to stuff like The Witcher and Tales of Arise, but aside from that, and I don't think it should be a bad thing because those are good games too. I feel like it was sometimes we just need to adapt. Look, point is, Final Fantasy, major franchise, very beloved, very entertaining for me. I think the games are great. I'm glad I got into them. Cloud, very iconic character, what who's he's so iconic that he was one chosen to be in Smash Brothers, despite him being initially a PlayStation character. That door was kind of opened by Solid Snake, but still, big character introduction to Smash, and it worked out well. Plus, Final Fantasy VII did eventually come to Nintendo, so it worked out there too. Right now, Final Fantasy VII is in the middle of a remake. I'm hoping the Final Fantasy VII remake was a little unusual. Rebirth looks like it gets a little better because I will say this: I do find it weird that the Final Fantasy VII remake was gonna split into three games, but they're making it work a little bit, I guess. I find it weird as three games, but I guess the story's too long for because it's not just a remake; they're adding stuff. It's not like when they remade Resident Evil 2. That Resident Evil 2 was I don't know, it's somewhere between faithful and different. So that's what but Final Fantasy VII's remake is just different. But it still maintains the core stuff, just adding a little more explanation of certain things and adding a bit more character to those who didn't have character before. So it works out. Anyway, that's all I have to say about Final Fantasy. I still enjoy the franchise. I just hope that it stays at its core. By that I mean, just keep it the way it was meant to be, the way Tetsuya Nomura wanted it to be. And let's see where the future goes from here. That's all I have to say. This is Storm Dash signing off.